Sometimes life doesn't just knock you down, it kicks you while you're on the ground. But every once in a while, a miracle happens and the weight of the world is lifted off your shoulders. This is a story about one of those miracles. A story about a teen mom, a mysterious millionaire, and a favor that changed everything. If you've ever felt like the odds were stacked against you, this story is for you. So grab a seat, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel because you won't want to miss what happens next. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of the judge's gavel slamming down. Ms. Johnson, you are ordered to pay $25,000 in medical debt within the next 90 days. Failure to do so will result in further legal action. The words echoed in 19-year-old Mia Johnson's ears as she clutched her 2-year-old son, Elijah, tightly to her chest. Her heart raced and her vision blurred. $25,000? How was she supposed to come up with that kind of money? She worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. This debt, a result of Elijah's emergency surgery when he was just a baby, felt like a mountain she could never climb. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the world pressed down on her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to Elijah, "I don't know how we're going to make it, baby. But I promise I'll figure something out." She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. Mia Johnson was no stranger to hardship. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she had always dreamed of becoming a nurse. But those dreams were put on hold when she found out she was pregnant at 17. Her boyfriend at the time, Elijah's father, had walked out on her the moment she told him the news. Her parents, strict and deeply religious, had disowned her, leaving her to fend for herself. Determined to give her son a better life, Mia worked tirelessly, flipping burgers during the day and cleaning offices at night. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. Elijah was her everything. With his curly hair and bright smile, he was the light in her darkest days. But his health had always been fragile. When he was just 6 months old, he had developed a severe respiratory infection that required emergency surgery. The hospital bills had piled up, and despite her best efforts, Mia had only been able to make small payments here and there. Now the debt collectors were coming after her and she felt like she was drowning. One evening, after a long shift at the diner, Mia decided to take Elijah to the park. It was their favorite way to unwind, and she loved watching him laugh as he played on the swings. As she sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone and trying to figure out how to stretch her last $20 until payday, a man approached her. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, and carried an air of confidence that made him stand out in the small park. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I couldn't help but notice your son. He's adorable." Mia looked up, startled. She wasn't used to strangers striking up conversations with her. "Thank you," she replied cautiously, pulling Elijah closer to her. The man smiled. "My name is Marcus Carter. I own a few businesses in the area, and I'm always looking for ways to give back to the community. I don't mean to intrude, but you look like you've got a lot on your mind. Is everything okay?" Mia hesitated. She wasn't sure why, but something about Marcus's kind eyes made her feel like she could trust him. Before she could stop herself, the words came pouring out. She told him about the debt, the court order, and how she didn't know how she was going to make ends meet. Marcus listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When she finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Mia, I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, but I want to help. Come see me at my office tomorrow morning and we'll figure something out." Mia stared at the card, her mind racing. Who was this man and why would he want to help her? She had heard stories about people offering help only to turn around and take advantage of those in need. But something about Marcus felt different. She didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter was about to change her life forever. The next morning, Mia found herself standing outside a sleek, modern office building in downtown Columbus. She had dressed Elijah in his best clothes and tried to calm her nerves as she walked through the glass doors. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and directed her to Marcus's office. Marcus was waiting for her, seated behind a large mahogany desk. He stood as she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Mia, I'm glad you came," he said. "I've been thinking about your situation and I want to make you an offer." Mia's heart pounded as she waited for him to continue. "I'm going to pay off your debt," Marcus said simply. "All $25,000 of it." Mia's jaw dropped. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I've been where you are. I grew up poor and I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you. But someone gave me a chance and now I want to do the same for you. There's just one condition. Mia's heart skipped a beat. What's the condition? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled. I want you to promise me that you'll never give up. No matter how hard things get, you keep fighting for yourself and your son. And when you're in a position to help someone else, you pay it forward. Tears filled Mia's eyes as she nodded. I promise, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. Marcus stood and extended his hand. Then we have a deal. As Mia left the office that day, she felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. But little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her in ways she never imagined. Because Marcus Carter had a secret, one that would soon turn her world upside down. Mia walked out of Marcus's office that day feeling like she was floating on air. The weight of the $25,000 debt had been lifted, and for the first time in years she felt like she could breathe. She held Elijah's tiny hand tightly as they made their way to the bus stop, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe she could finally go back to school and finish her nursing degree. Maybe she could find a better job, one that didn't leave her exhausted and barely scraping by. Maybe, just maybe, life was finally turning around for her and Elijah. But as the days turned into weeks, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Marcus had been true to his word, her debt had been paid in full, and she hadn't heard a peep from the debt collectors since. But every time she thought about the favor he had asked of her, a knot formed in her stomach. Pay it forward, he had said. It sounded simple enough, but Mia couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it than that. Marcus Carter was a man of mystery. At 35 years old, he was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the Midwest, with a portfolio that included real estate, tech startups, and even a chain of luxury spas. But despite his wealth and success, he was notoriously private. He rarely gave interviews, and when he did, he spoke in vague terms about his upbringing and how he had made his fortune. The few people who knew him well described him as kind but guarded, someone who preferred to let his actions speak louder than his words. What Mia didn't know was that Marcus had a past, one that he had worked hard to leave behind. He had grown up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. He had seen firsthand how the system could crush people, especially those who didn't have the means to fight back. And he had made a promise to himself that if he ever made it out, he would do whatever he could to help others do the same. But Marcus's rise to success hadn't been without its challenges. Along the way he had made enemies, powerful people who didn't take kindly to a black man from the South Side climbing the ladder and breaking barriers. And now those enemies were closing in. One evening as Mia was putting Elijah to bed, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. Can we meet tomorrow? There's something I need to discuss with you. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from Marcus since their meeting in his office, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What could he possibly want to talk about now? The next morning, Mia dropped Elijah off at daycare and made her way to Marcus's office. When she arrived, she was surprised to find him pacing back and forth, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an air of tension. Mia, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I need your help with something. Mia's mind raced. What could Marcus Carter, a millionaire with more resources than she could ever imagine, possibly need her help with? What is it? She asked cautiously. Marcus took a deep breath. I'm in trouble, he said. There are people who want to see me fail, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. I need someone I can trust to help me navigate this. Someone who understands what it's like to fight against the odds. Mia stared at him, her mind reeling. Why me? She asked. I'm just a single mom trying to make ends meet. I don't know anything about your world. Marcus shook his head. You're stronger than you think, Mia. You've been through more than most people could handle and you're still standing. That's the kind of strength I need right now. Mia hesitated. She didn't know what Marcus was asking of her, but she couldn't deny that she owed him. He had given her a second chance and now he was asking for her help. What do you need me to do? She asked finally. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. I need you to be my eyes and ears. There's a gala coming up, a fundraiser for one of my charities. I need you to attend with me and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. These people, they're dangerous, Mia. And if they find out what I'm planning, it could put both of us at risk. Mia's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been to a gala before, let alone rubbed shoulders with the kind of people Marcus was talking about. But she couldn't back down now. Okay, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. I'll do it. The night of the gala arrived, and Mia found herself standing in front of a full-length mirror, staring at her reflection in disbelief. Marcus had sent over a dress, a sleek, floor-length gown that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her hair had been styled into soft waves, and a pair of diamond earrings sparkled in her ears. She barely recognized herself. As she stepped out of the car and onto the red carpet, Mia felt a surge of adrenaline. The gala was being held at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city, and the room was filled with the who's who of Columbus society. Marcus greeted her with a warm smile, but Mia could see the tension in his eyes. "Stay close," he whispered as they made their way inside. The evening passed in a blur of champagne, small talk and fake smiles. Mia did her best to blend in, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she glanced around the room, she caught people staring at her, their expressions unreadable. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just her imagination, but the unease lingered. Then just as the night was winding down, it happened. Marcus was in the middle of a conversation with a group of investors when a man approached him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Marcus," the man said, his voice dripping with false charm. "It's been a while." Marcus's expression hardened. "What do you want, Victor?" he asked, his tone icy. Victor smirked. "Just wanted to remind you that no matter how high you climb, there's always someone waiting to pull you back down." He glanced at Mia, his eyes narrowing. "And it looks like you've brought a friend." "How quaint." Mia's heart raced as she met Victor's gaze. There was something about him that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but one thing was clear. He was dangerous. As Victor walked away, Marcus turned to Mia, his expression grim. "We need to leave. Now." The ride back to Marcus's office was tense and silent. Mia sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing as she replayed the events of the evening. Who was Victor, and why had his presence shaken Marcus so much? She wanted to ask, but the look on Marcus's face told her now wasn't the time. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past as they sped through the streets. When they finally arrived at the office, Marcus led her to a private conference room and closed the door behind them. He poured himself a glass of water and took a long sip before turning to face her. "Mia," he began, his voice heavy with regret, "I owe you an explanation." Mia crossed her arms, her heart pounding. "You think?" she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Marcus, what's going on? Who was that guy, and why did he act like he wanted to kill you?" Marcus sighed and ran a hand over his face. "Victor Russo," he said. "He's a business rival. But it's more complicated than that. We have history, bad history. He's been trying to take me down for years, and now he's getting desperate." Mia frowned. "What does that have to do with me? Why did you bring me into this?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Because I need someone I can trust," he said quietly. "Someone who isn't connected to my world. Victor's been watching me for months, and he's getting closer to figuring out what I'm planning. If he finds out, it could ruin everything." Mia's stomach churned. She didn't like the sound of this. "What are you planning, Marcus?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus looked up, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm working on a project. A foundation to help single parents like you. It's called the Second Chance Initiative. We'll provide housing, childcare, and job training to help people get back on their feet. But Victor, he doesn't want to see me succeed. He's been sabotaging my businesses, spreading rumors, and now he's targeting the people close to me." Mia's eyes widened. "You think he's going to come after me?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I don't want to scare you, Mia, but yes. That's why I need your help. I need someone who can keep an eye on things from the outside, someone Victor won't suspect. But I understand if this is too much. If you want to walk away, I won't stop you." Mia stared at him, her mind racing. She had just gotten her life back on track, and now Marcus was asking her to step into a world of danger and intrigue. But as much as she wanted to say no, she couldn't ignore the debt she owed him. He had given her a second chance when no one else would, and now he was asking for her help in return. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "But you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," Marcus said without hesitation. "You have to keep Elijah safe," Mia said, her voice breaking. "He's all I have, Marcus. If anything happens to him..." Marcus stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I swear to you, Mia, I'll do everything in my power to protect you and Elijah. You have my word." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus set Mia up in a safe house, a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood far from the city. He arranged for Elijah to stay with a trusted nanny during the day while Mia worked with Marcus to gather information on Victor's operations. It was a crash course in espionage, and Mia quickly realized that Marcus's world was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Victor Russo was a powerful man with connections in every corner of the city. He owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, but that was just a front for his real business: money laundering, extortion, and blackmail. Marcus had been trying to expose him for years, but Victor was always one step ahead. Now, with the Second Chance initiative on the horizon, Victor was pulling out all the stops to take Marcus down. Mia's role was simple but risky. She was to pose as a new employee at one of Victor's dealerships, using a fake identity to gather intel on his operations. It was a dangerous game, but Mia was determined to see it through. She had come too far to back down now. Her first day at the dealership was nerve-wracking. Mia had never been good at lying, but she forced herself to stay calm as she introduced herself to the staff. Her cover story was that she was a recent college graduate looking to break into the automotive industry. It was flimsy at best, but no one seemed to question it. As the days went by, Mia settled into her new role. She kept her head down, did her work, and quietly observed everything around her. She quickly learned that Victor's employees were fiercely loyal, but also deeply afraid of him. They spoke in hushed tones about his temper and his willingness to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. One evening, as she was closing up the dealership, Mia overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two of Victor's top managers were discussing a shipment of merchandise that was due to arrive the next day. They spoke in code, but it was clear that they were talking about something illegal. Mia's heart raced as she quickly texted Marcus the details. "I think I found something," she wrote. "They're expecting a shipment tomorrow. Could be drugs or weapons. What should I do?" Marcus's response came almost immediately. "Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to pick you up. Don't do anything until I get there." But before Mia could respond, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see one of the managers standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowed. "What are you still doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. Mia forced a smile. "Just finishing up some paperwork," she said, her voice trembling. "I was about to head out." The manager studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. You shouldn't be here after hours. Victor doesn't like people poking around where they don't belong." Mia's heart pounded as she grabbed her bag and hurried out of the dealership. She didn't know if the manager suspected anything, but she couldn't take any chances. As she stepped outside, she saw a black SUV parked across the street. The driver waved her over and she quickly climbed inside. "You okay?" the driver asked as they pulled away from the curb. Mia nodded, but her hands were shaking. "I think they're on to me," she said. "We need to warn Marcus." The SUV sped through the city streets, the driver navigating the traffic with practiced ease. Mia sat in the back seat, her heart still racing from the close call at the dealership. She clutched her phone tightly, waiting for Marcus to call. When her phone finally buzzed, she answered it immediately. "Mia, are you okay?" Marcus's voice was tense, and she could hear the worry in his tone. "I'm fine," she said, trying to steady her breathing. "But I think they suspect something. One of the managers caught me after hours, and he said Victor doesn't like people poking around where they don't belong." Marcus cursed under his breath. "This is bad. If Victor's onto you, it's only a matter of time before he figures out who you really are. We need to move fast. What do you want me to do?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Stay put for now," Marcus said. "I'm sending you to a new safe house. It's further out of the city and Victor won't be able to find you there. I'll meet you tomorrow to figure out our next move." Mia nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. "Okay. But Marcus, what about Elijah? If Victor's as dangerous as you say, I can't risk him getting hurt." "Elijah will be safe," Marcus assured her. "I've already arranged for him to stay with a trusted friend. She's a former police officer, and she knows how to handle herself. Victor won't get anywhere near him." Mia let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do if something happened to him." "I know," Marcus said softly. "And I promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you both safe. Just hang in there, Mia. We're close to taking Victor down. We just need to stay one step ahead." The new safe house was a small cabin nestled in the woods, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was cozy and secluded, with a fireplace, a fully stocked kitchen, and a view of the surrounding trees. Mia tried to relax, but her mind was racing. She couldn't stop thinking about Elijah and whether he was safe. She called the nanny Marcus had arranged, and hearing Elijah's laughter on the other end of the line brought her some comfort. But it wasn't enough to ease the knot of anxiety in her chest. The next morning Marcus arrived at the cabin, his expression grim. He carried a folder filled with documents and spread them out on the kitchen table. "I've been digging into Victor's operations," he said, pointing to a map of the city. "He's got his hands in everything, drugs, weapons, even human trafficking. But his weak spot is his money. If we can cut off his cash flow, we can bring him down." Mia frowned. "How do we do that?" Marcus tapped a photo of a man in his mid-40s with a receding hairline and a stern expression. "This is Frank Delaney. He's Victor's accountant, and he's the one who handles all of Victor's dirty money. If we can get him to talk, we can expose Victor's entire operation." Mia's eyes widened. "You want me to talk to him?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I'll handle Frank. But I need you to do something else. Victor's hosting a charity auction next week. It's a front for one of his money laundering schemes. I need you to attend and gather as much information as you can. Take photos, record conversations, anything that can help us build a case against him." Mia's stomach churned at the thought of facing Victor again, but she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The night of the auction arrived, and Mia found herself standing in front of a mirror once again, this time in a sleek black dress and heels. Marcus had provided her with a hidden camera disguised as a necklace and a tiny recording device hidden in her clutch. She felt like a character in a spy movie, but the stakes were all too real. The auction was held in a lavish ballroom at one of the city's most exclusive hotels. The room was filled with wealthy socialites and business moguls, all sipping champagne and bidding on expensive artwork and jewelry. Mia moved through the crowd, her eyes scanning the room for Victor. She spotted him near the stage, surrounded by a group of admirers. He looked every bit the charming philanthropist, but Mia knew better. As she mingled with the guests, she discreetly activated the recording device and began capturing snippets of conversation. She overheard one man bragging about a lucrative investment opportunity that sounded suspiciously like money laundering. Another woman mentioned a special shipment that was due to arrive next week. Mia's heart raced as she realized just how deep Victor's corruption went. But as the evening wore on, Mia began to feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she glanced around the room, she caught Victor's eyes on her, his expression unreadable. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just her imagination, but the unease lingered. Then, as she was making her way to the restroom, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see Victor standing beside her, his smile cold and calculating. "Mia, isn't it?" he said, his voice smooth but menacing. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Mia's heart pounded, but she forced herself to smile. "Yes, that's right. I'm new to the city." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Funny. You don't look like the type to attend these kinds of events. What brings you here tonight?" Mia's mind raced as she tried to come up with a convincing lie. "I'm here with a friend," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the crowd. "She couldn't make it, so I came alone." Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Mia forced a smile. "Thank you. I will." As Victor walked away, Mia's hands trembled. She didn't know if he believed her, but one thing was clear. He was on to her. She needed to get out of there, fast. Mia's heart raced as she slipped out of the ballroom and into the hotel lobby. She needed to get as far away from Victor as possible. Pulling out her phone, she quickly texted Marcus. Victor confronted me. He knows something's up. I'm leaving now. Marcus's response came almost instantly. Get to the car out front. I'll meet you at the safe house. Mia didn't waste a second. She hurried through the lobby, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and pushed through the revolving doors into the cool night air. A black sedan was waiting at the curb, the driver nodding at her as she climbed into the back seat. The car pulled away from the hotel, and Mia finally allowed herself to breathe. But the relief was short-lived. As they drove through the city, Mia noticed a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror. The car had been following them since they left the hotel, and it was gaining fast. Her stomach dropped. We're being followed, she said, her voice trembling. The driver glanced in the mirror and cursed under his breath. Hold on, he said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He swerved onto a side street, the tires screeching as he accelerated. Mia clutched the door handle, her heart pounding as the car behind them matched their every move. The chase lasted for what felt like an eternity. The driver weaved through narrow alleys and side streets, trying to lose their pursuers, but the other car stayed close. Finally, after a sharp turn onto a deserted road, the driver slammed on the brakes and pulled into an empty parking lot. The car behind them sped past, its taillights disappearing into the night. Mia let out a shaky breath. Did we lose them? The driver nodded, though his expression was grim. For now. But we need to get you out of the city. Victor's not going to stop until he finds you. When they arrived at the safe house, Marcus was waiting for them. He looked tense, his jaw clenched as he paced the living room. What happened? He asked as soon as Mia walked in. Mia quickly filled him in on the confrontation with Victor and the car chase. Marcus listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. This is bad, he said when she finished. If Victor's willing to go this far, it means he's desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. Mia sank onto the couch, her legs trembling. What do we do now? He's not going to stop until he finds me. Marcus sat down beside her, his voice calm but firm. We stick to the plan. I've been working with the FBI to build a case against Victor. If we can get Frank Delaney to testify, we can bring him down for good. But we need to move fast. Mia frowned. What about Elijah? I can't keep him hidden forever. He needs me. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. I know. And I promise this will all be over soon. But for now you need to stay here and lay low. Victor's got eyes everywhere, and if he finds you... Mia nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of being separated from Elijah for even a day longer. Okay, she said quietly. But Marcus, what if this doesn't work? What if Victor wins? Marcus met her gaze, his eyes filled with determination. He won't. Not as long as I'm breathing. The next few days were a blur of tension and waiting. Mia stayed at the safe house, her nerves frayed as she waited for news from Marcus. She spent her days pacing the cabin, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Victor found Elijah? What if Marcus got hurt? What if this whole plan fell apart? Finally, on the third day, Marcus called. It's done, he said, his voice filled with relief. Frank Delaney agreed to testify. The FBI is moving in on Victor as we speak. Mia's heart leapt. Does that mean it's over? Almost, Marcus said. But we need to be careful. Victor's not going down without a fight. Stay where you are and I'll come get you as soon as it's safe. Mia nodded, though her hands were shaking. Okay. Just, hurry. But Marcus never made it to the safe house. Hours passed and there was no word from him. Mia tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her anxiety grew with every passing minute, until she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, determined to find out what had happened. As she stepped outside, she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. She froze, her heart pounding as a car pulled up to the cabin. For a moment she thought it was Marcus. But when the door opened, her blood ran cold. Victor Russo stepped out of the car, his cold eyes locking onto hers. Hello, Mia, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Did you really think you could hide from me? Mia backed away, her mind racing. Where's Marcus? She demanded, her voice trembling. Victor smirked. Let's just say he's tied up at the moment. But don't worry. You'll be joining him soon. Mia's heart pounded as she realized the danger she was in. She turned to run, but Victor's men were already closing in. She didn't get far before strong hands grabbed her, pulling her back toward the car. Let me go, she screamed, struggling against their grip. But it was no use. Victor's men were too strong, and within moments she was shoved into the back seat of the car. As the car sped away from the cabin, Mia's mind raced. She didn't know what Victor had planned for her, but one thing was clear. She was on her own now. And if she wanted to survive, she would have to fight like she'd never fought before. The car ride was a blur of fear and desperation. Mia sat sandwiched between two of Victor's men, her hands bound with zip ties. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but her mind was racing. Where were they taking her? What had happened to Marcus? And most importantly, how was she going to get out of this alive? Victor sat in the front seat, his cold eyes occasionally glancing back at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't say a word, but the smug smirk on his face told Mia everything she needed to know. He thought he had won. And maybe he had, for now. The car eventually pulled up to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was dark and foreboding, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. Mia's stomach churned as she was dragged out of the car and into the warehouse. The air inside was damp and musty, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Victor's men shoved her into a chair and tied her hands behind her back. Mia's heart pounded as she looked around the room, her eyes landing on a figure slumped in the corner. It was Marcus. His face was bruised and bloodied, and his hands were bound just like hers. But when he looked up and saw Mia, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and guilt. Mia, he said, his voice hoarse. I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get caught up in this. Mia's eyes filled with tears. It's not your fault, she said, her voice trembling. We're going to get out of this. I promise. Victor let out a cold laugh as he stepped into the center of the room. How touching, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But I'm afraid this little reunion is going to be short-lived. You see, I've got big plans for the two of you. Mia glared at him, her fear giving way to anger. What do you want, Victor? You've already won. Why are you doing this? Victor's smirk widened. Because I can, he said simply. You and Marcus thought you could take me down, but you underestimated me. And now you're going to pay for that mistake. He turned to one of his men and nodded. The man stepped forward, holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Mia's heart raced as she realized what was about to happen. No, she said, her voice shaking. Please don't do this. Victor ignored her, his cold eyes fixed on Marcus. You thought you could ruin me, Marcus. But now I'm going to ruin you. And I'm going to make sure you watch as I destroy everything you care about. Mia's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. She couldn't let Victor win. She couldn't let him hurt Marcus or Elijah. But what could she do? She was tied up, outnumbered, and completely at his mercy. Then, as Victor's man approached Marcus with the syringe, Mia noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A loose nail on the floor just within reach. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She shifted in her chair, trying to position herself so she could grab it without being noticed. Victor's man was just about to inject Marcus when Mia made her move. She grabbed the nail and began sawing at the zip ties around her wrists. It was slow going and every second felt like an eternity, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Finally, the zip ties snapped. Mia didn't hesitate. She leapt to her feet and charged at Victor's man, tackling him to the ground. The syringe fell from his hand and skittered across the floor. Victor's other men moved to intervene, but Marcus was ready. Despite his injuries, he managed to kick one of them in the knee, sending him sprawling. The room erupted into chaos. Mia grabbed the syringe and held it like a weapon, her eyes darting around the room as she tried to figure out her next move. Victor's men were closing in, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Then, just as things seemed hopeless, the sound of sirens filled the air. Victor's men froze, their eyes wide with panic. Cops, one of them shouted. We gotta get out of here. Victor's face twisted with rage. No, he shouted. We're not leaving until they're dead. But it was too late. The warehouse doors burst open, and a swarm of FBI agents poured in, their guns drawn. Freeze, one of them shouted. Put your hands in the air. Victor's men didn't need to be told twice. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands, their faces pale with fear. Victor, however, wasn't ready to give up. He lunged at Mia, his eyes filled with hatred. But before he could reach her, an FBI agent tackled him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. Mia let out a shaky breath as the adrenaline began to fade. She turned to Marcus, who was being helped to his feet by another agent. Are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. Marcus nodded, though his face was pale and his breathing was labored. I'll live, he said, managing a weak smile. Thanks to you. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she threw her arms around him. I thought I was going to lose you, she said, her voice breaking. Marcus hugged her back, his grip tight despite his injuries. You didn't, he said softly. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you or Elijah. Not ever again. The next few hours were a blur of police reports, medical checkups, and tearful reunions. Mia was finally able to see Elijah again, and the moment she held him in her arms, she felt like she could breathe for the first time in days. Marcus was taken to the hospital to treat his injuries, but he assured Mia he would be okay. As the sun rose over the city, Mia sat on the steps of the FBI headquarters, Elijah asleep in her arms. She felt exhausted but also relieved. It was over. Victor was in custody, and his empire was crumbling. Marcus's second chance initiative was safe, and so were the people who depended on it. Marcus joined her a few minutes later, his arm in a sling and a bandage on his forehead. He sat down beside her, his eyes filled with gratitude. We did it, he said quietly. Thanks to you. Mia shook her head. We did it together, she said, smiling through her tears. And I couldn't have done it without you. Marcus reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. You're stronger than you think, Mia. And I'm proud to call you my friend. Mia's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. What happens now? She asked. Marcus smiled. Now we rebuild. Together. And as they sat there watching the sun rise over the city, Mia felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she could face it, because she wasn't alone anymore.